A Brief History of Modern North Korea for Political Risk Analysts by Corey's Political Risk Analysis. This is a historical summary of North Korea from 1914 to 2025. Part 1. Korea under Japanese rule, 1910 to 1945. During World War I, Korea was not an independent state, but a colony of the Japanese Empire, having been annexed in 1910. Japan used Korea as a resource base and for strategic military positioning. Though Korea was not directly involved in World War I, the global upheaval inspired Korean nationalists to push for independence. This culminated in the March 1st movement of 1919, where mass peaceful protests were brutally suppressed by Japanese forces, leading to thousands of deaths and arrests. However, this event galvanized the Korean independence movement at home and abroad. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Japan increased its assimilation policies and industrial exploitation of Korea. Some Koreans collaborated, but many resisted through guerrilla warfare or fled to China and the Soviet Union. Among the anti-Japanese resistance fighters was Kim Il-sung, a young Marxist-Leninist who would later become the founding leader of North Korea. Part 2. Division of Korea and the Korean War, 1945 to 1953. World War II brought an end to Japanese rule. In 1945, Japan's defeat led to the liberation of Korea. But rather than restoring a unified Korean state, the US and the Soviet Union divided the peninsula at the 38th parallel. The north was occupied by Soviet forces, while the south fell under American control. In 1948, after failed attempts at reunification, two separate governments were established: Republic of Korea, which is South Korea, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is North Korea. In 1950, North Korea invaded the South in an attempt to reunify the country under communist rule, sparking the Korean War. The conflict quickly escalated into a proxy war. North Korea was backed by China and the Soviet Union. South Korea was supported by the United States and the United Nations. The war caused immense destruction and loss of life. Over 2 million Koreans died. In 1953, an armistice was signed, but no peace treaty, leaving the Korean peninsula technically still at war. Part 3. Kim Il-sung's regime and Juche ideology from 1953 to 1994. After the war, Kim Il-sung solidified power, launching purges in a Stalinist-style dictatorship centered on a personality cult. His leadership emphasized Juche, a self-reliant ideology that rejected foreign influence. The 1960s and 1970s saw significant industrial growth, aided by Soviet and Chinese aid, but also widespread repression. Key features of this period included nationalization of all industries, mass indoctrination and surveillance, militarization and emphasis on heavy industry, and the creation of a state-controlled society where dissent was punishable by imprisonment or execution. Despite initial economic growth, by the 1980s, North Korea began to fall behind South Korea in terms of development. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and loss of foreign aid plunged North Korea into crisis. Part 4. Famine and the Rise of Kim Jong-il, 1994 to 2011. Kim Il-sung died in 1994, and power passed to his son, Kim Jong-il, solidifying the world's first communist dynastic succession. His rule coincided with the arduous march, a devastating famine in the 1990s, caused by natural disasters, mismanagement of the economy, loss of Soviet support. Estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands to possibly 2 million people died from starvation. Despite the humanitarian crisis, the regime prioritized military spending, adopting the Sangun military first policy. In the early 2000s, North Korea began to pursue nuclear weapons withdrawing from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 2003. The first nuclear test was conducted in 2006, leading to global condemnation and sanctions. Part 5. Kim Jong-un's leadership and modern developments from 2011 to 2025. Kim Jong-il died in 2011, succeeded by his son Kim Jong-un, then in his late 20s. Many doubted the young leader's ability to consolidate power, but he quickly eliminated rivals, including his uncle Jang Song-thaek in 2013 and half-brother Kim Jong-nam in 2017. Kim Jong-un continued developing the nuclear program. Additional nuclear tests in 2013, 2016, and 2017. Successful launch of intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, and claimed the ability to strike the U.S. mainland. Tensions peaked in 2017 with hostile rhetoric exchanged between Kim and U.S. President Donald Trump. However, diplomacy followed. Historic summits between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump in Singapore in 2018 and Hanoi 2019, meeting with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Despite initial hopes, talks collapsed over denuclearization demands. By 2020, negotiations had stalled entirely. Part 6. The Virus Era, from 2020 to 2023. North Korea claimed 0 COVID cases for much of the pandemic, but this was widely doubted. In 2022, the regime acknowledged an outbreak, but declared victory soon after. The country sealed its borders, further isolating itself and worsening its already dire economy. Food shortages intensified, exacerbated by sanctions and poor harvest. Reports from defectors and NGOs suggested widespread malnutrition, though full access to data remained restricted. Despite the economic challenges, the regime pressed forward with military advancements, unveiling new missile types, and testing hypersonic technology. Kim continued to reject calls to denuclearize, portraying nuclear weapons as essential to regime survival. Part 7. Developments to 2025. By 2025, North Korea remains one of the world's most authoritarian and isolated countries, a nuclear-armed state outside international arms control frameworks, heavily reliant on China for trade and diplomacy, although relations remain cautious. Internally, the regime under Kim Jong-un has pursued a policy of limited modernization, encouraging elite consumerism in Pyongyang, while maintaining strict control elsewhere. The economy remains stagnant, and the country is subject to UN sanctions and international condemnation for human rights abuses. Tensions periodically flare along the Demilitarized Zone, or the DMZ, and other missile tests. Over missile tests. Reunification with South Korea remains a distant ideal, with both sides entrenched in their political systems. Conclusion. North Korea's history from World War I to 2025 reflects a journey from colonization and division to totalitarianism and isolation. The Kim family dynasty has overseen decades of militarization, famine, and confrontation with the outside world, despite diplomatic overtures in the late 2010s. The country remains defiant, nuclear-armed, and enigmatic. Yet the North Korean people, largely voiceless in the international community, continue to endure hardship under a regime that prioritizes survival and sovereignty over openness or reform.